Um, so we've been tiptoeing in the area of like the "is it good" question, or should
Mm.
I get Bitcoin? We touched on some maybe prudential questions, but maybe can we shift to the ethical and moral dimension of this?
Mm.
What's the moral upshot of, or cost perhaps, of getting oneself into the Bitcoin game?
There's two distinct questions here. One is, what's the moral upshot of the existence of Bitcoin? And then another is, what's the moral upshot of you having some Bitcoin? So we could ask like whether Bitcoin is good, or we could ask whether it's good for you to own some Bitcoin. And those could come apart. So usually when I think about it, I think of the Bitcoin network itself and what the moral upshots of its existence are, and Bitcoin's use in general. You owning Bitcoin will have very little effect on anything that Bitcoin brings to the table with respect to its features. So, but you might think, well, if something's bad, then I shouldn't have it, and if it's good, then I should have it, or something like that. But there will be a lot more questions involved there. For example, what do you hope to pass on to your kids, and what are you giving up, and all these other questions. So, in terms of just Bitcoin itself, we've talked a little bit about privacy and about censorship resistance. So Bitcoin enables you to transact for anything that you like without a intermediary validating those transactions and saying that it's okay for you to have that. So if you try to go buy something with your Visa card, Visa could say, we don't think that's okay for you to buy. And we're not going to allow this. Or they might say, we don't think that you should give money to this person, so we're not going to allow it. Similarly with banks. So if you try to wire some money to Russian opposition leaders, their banks may say, no, they don't get to have a bank account. You can't send this money. Bitcoin allows you to bypass that. There is no one who can throttle your transactions on the Bitcoin network. And so this can, of course, be used for good, and it can also be used for ill. It means that you can help out people who are trying to flee oppressive regimes by sending them wealth in a way that their government can't stop them from getting. But on the other hand, it also means that you can pay someone for drugs or to assassinate someone, and nobody can stop you from doing that. So in that way, it's a little like physical cash. Nobody can stop you from giving a $5 bill to someone else. It's less noticeable if you're traveling with large amounts of it, so it's a little more difficult to seize. But in that respect, it has the privacy, a lot of the privacy features, at least, of physical cash.
Here's an angle that we haven't brought in yet, which is the perspective not of Americans or of people in the developed world, but of approximately the other 2 billion people alive, 2 billion plus, who live under monetary regimes that are handled just disastrously, hyperinflationary regimes. For an appreciable fraction of the world's population, the only way to store their value has been in gold or in land or in US dollars. If they use their local currency, the value will be sucked out of them 10, 20, 30% a year, or in hyperinflationary times, even more. What Bitcoin offers people in Venezuela, for example, right now, is the opportunity to buy something and to hold it on the balance sheet, something that's digital, that's hard to be taken away from them, and that doesn't depreciate like their local currency. You might say, well, why not just use US dollars? Well, because Venezuela doesn't want its citizens to use US dollars. They do everything they can to prevent citizens from acquiring US dollars through their ordinary banking channels. They close down trading pairs or regulate them heavily or fine them or have fees and so on. So we can speak from a position of enormous, we might call it monetary privilege. The US dollar, despite our criticisms of it, is still okay. It's an okay way to store value for a year or two. But not everyone has access to the US dollar. Not everyone has access to gold. Not everyone has access to land. These are the other classical ways of storing value. So if we're thinking about, is Bitcoin good for the world? I think it would behoove us to think not just about us, but about the rest of the world too. And that's where I start to think that there's a serious moral case here, that it is good for the world for there to be a product like this, a digital gold that can't be stopped, or at least can't be stopped very easily.
It may even incentivize some of those countries to be a little bit more responsible with their monetary policy, knowing that there's competition out there that their citizens have access to.
Yeah,
And
so
this
I see
depend
as... Please, Clint, go.
This does all depend on internet access too. I need to be able to access the internet to upload my transaction to the nodes. I don't know if I'm using that language right.
Refresh your ledger.
Refresh the ledger.
Yeah.
And some of these countries, I guess my question would be, are we trying to do this too soon? Like, the world doesn't, not all of the world has internet yet.
We need Starlink.
Would the third world countries be falling behind in a sense by, like, they don't have access to the Bitcoin now? Will that be just even more difficult in the future for them to come by a shard of the 21 million Bitcoin later?
Clint, I would have taken that question and it would have kept me up at night 10 years ago. Here's something that's changed over the last 10, 15 years that makes me much more comfortable with Bitcoin as a proposed solution here, which is that the penetration of the mobile phone across the world is not quite complete, but it is staggering. So I'll just give you an example from my own backyard. I'm speaking here from Singapore. Right across the way is Indonesia, about 250 million people in Indonesia. There are over 250 million mobile phones in Indonesia. There's more than one per person. And most of these are smartphones. That is, they're smart enough to do Bitcoin. This means that right in my backyard, there are 250 million people that have access to this new digital native gold-like product that can protect them from the hyperinflation or just excessive inflation of the Indonesian rupiah, which is in fact Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are in fact widely used in Indonesia for just this purpose. This is a way to store value that's outside of the rupiah system. And so if you thought, oh, you have to have a big fancy computer to access Bitcoin, that would be a real worry. But you don't. You need a $50 just El Cheapo smartphone will do the trick now. So the other piece of the puzzle is, well, what about internet access? Well, internet access for mobile users is better now than ever before, and it's basically a line that only goes up and to the right. So we have yet to see that trend taper off. So penetration across the entire world is it's on a very, very good trend. And this is across sub-Saharan Africa, across all of Southeast Asia, across all of India, places where you might worry that these parts of the world will fall behind. They're actually doing very well in internet penetration. So that's one thing that gives me a great deal of hope here.
And in order to, might be required in order to transact with Bitcoin, but in order to store value in Bitcoin, you just have to access the computer once to get it, and then one more time when you want to, use it for something else. So you could conceivably go to an internet cafe, buy some Bitcoin, go home, wait 10 years, and then use the Bitcoin for something. And in the interim, you have the private key to a Bitcoin address. Nobody else has it, so the Bitcoin can't move from the address it's at to any other address. So it'll be there waiting for you when you get back on the internet again to transact with it. You can have a friend get some for you and write down, if you trust the friend, write down your private key, stamp your private key on a plate or something like that, and store it in some way. But you don't have to consistently access it. So much like if someone sends you an email to your email address, it'll be there whenever you go and try to check your email address. Your Bitcoin will also be there.
Wow.
And in fact, you have a greater assurance of your Bitcoin being there than your email being there, because let's say you had a Gmail address. Well, Google could shut it down. But the Bitcoin ledger is stored across tens of thousands of computers all across the world. So even if Google shuts something down or one of those nodes shuts down, there are thousands of others that will keep the ledger alive and keep your Bitcoin safe.
Sounds good.
You guys are making it sound really good.